I'm Rachel Walton, for those I haven't met, and I have the pleasure of being the board chair for Shtetl 2.0. I am going to introduce Sandy shortly, but I just want to give you a little bit about the agenda first. I'm going to do an introduction. Sandra Butler is going to talk for a bit about her recent 2 books. And then we'll have an extended Q&A, which we're going to do using cards. Before I introduce Sandy, I do want to contextualize what it is we're doing here. Shtetl 2.0 is, depending on how you count it, either 2 years or 6 months old. 6 months ago, we became officially a 501c3 or under a 501c3 umbrella. We were official because we had bylaws, board, and a budget. So those were the important parts. We spent the summer pulling together the website and the database and all those things we need to run efficiently and reach out to folks. And finally, in the middle of September, we began accepting memberships. So in terms of memberships, we have only been going since September 15th, and we already have 80 plus members, which is pretty amazing. And we also decided not to have a set membership fee, but invite people to make a meaningful donation within their means. We want this to be accessible to everyone. That's at least for the first year. We haven't decided what to do about membership in following years. We have garnered in pledges and membership donations about $20,000, which is pretty remarkable. And I especially want to call out Sam and Connie Katz, who made a lead gift of $6,000 just to get us going. And that was very encouraging and made it possible for us to really be here today. One of the things we did over the summer is we also joined the Village to Village Network. You may not be aware that this village concept is about 25 years old. It started in the Boston area with Beacon Hill. And there are now in excess of 250 villages across the country. We are a village which is pretty much defined as neighbors helping neighbors, grassroots project of neighbors helping neighbors. And there's a well-known saying in the village movement that if you've seen one village, you've seen one village. Each one makes up its own rules and its own culture, and we have chosen to engage in Jewish culture, but that doesn't mean you have to be Jewish to join. You simply have to feel comfortable in a Jewish context. We use a Jewish calendar and obviously Jewish food and all the likes. That's what we're about. And I first learned about Sandy because she wrote to me and said, this is who I am, and I think I might be a good fit. And I went, wow, unbelievable. How did you find us? And so that's what's happening here. It took a little while to put this together, but we're really delighted that we have. So I want to move on to introducing Sandy. We're not quite sure how the segue to Sandy talking is going to go with getting this up on screen. So you may have to bear with us for a few moments while we get everything working. Sandra Butler was raised in a very conventional 1940s Boston suburb to become a wife and mother. Familiar scenario. And she spent 7 years being unsuccessful as a proper wife, as she calls it, while continuing to delight in mothering. So a divorce then catapulted her and her 2 young daughters into the turbulent 1960s, and she became immersed in the anti-war and civil rights movements and found her political and personal foundation in the second wave women's liberation movement of the 1970s. Sandy began college in her mid-30s, which led to graduate study, 5 books, 2 films, and decades of organizing and community building, including 50 years, most recently in the Bay Area. Each of Sandy's 5 books identify and explore something unspoken in women's and girls' lives. Her first, The Conspiracy of Silence, The Trauma of Incest, brought attention to the sexual violation of girls. Cancer in 2 Voices, co-written with her partner Barbara Rosenblum, frankly explored how a lesbian couple navigates the death of a partner. And It Never Ends Mothering Middle-Aged Daughters, co-authored with Nan Fink-Geffen, described the intersection of aging and mothering while challenging the myths around both. Recently, in The Kitchen is Closed and Other Benefits of Old Age, her experience moving from aging all the way to old, a word she insists on. And her most recent book, Leaving Home at 83, which I just happen to have here, which I must say is a marvelous read, explores her struggles to balance her insistence on autonomy and independence with a growing longing to be taken care of. Unless you think that at 86, she is a hermit writer, here's a bit of what she wrote about a recent demonstration she attended in downtown Tucson, Arizona. Most of the demonstrators were over 60, seasoned demonstrators with their orthopedic shoes, water bottles, sun hats, canes that became seats, and handmade signs. They had all been down dozens of roads requiring their presence, their outrage, and their resistance. They will continue to show up because that is how they live. That is who they are. That is how they and I know ourselves. Just because we have to protest while seated doesn't mean we don't have to protest. I felt so much less alone, so much a sense of these are my people. We belonged with one another. We understood without words what we were doing and why we were there. It's not about the outcome. It's about how we live the remainder of our lives. You've got a lot of amens there.
Okay.
With that introduction, please welcome author and activist Sandra Butler.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It occurred to me as Rivka was talking, we should have added the phrase Vilda Chaya to my bio, and I think I will do that going forward. So you already have a little bit of a sense of me from the introduction. I think what I want to add before I talk about leaving home at 83 is that all of my books are designed to be an invitation to other women to find their stories that resonate with my stories. It's never for me about telling my story. That's the political part of my writing. It's to invite stories. And what I'm hoping for today is you will all be moved to begin conversations that will illuminate your questions, your struggles, your insecurities, your limitations, your strengths as you begin to think about how you want to inhabit the last chapter of your lives. So that's for this talk. I'm going to talk about 3 books, actually. I'm working on the 3rd book. I always meant for them to be 3 books. And I'm going to read a little section from the book I'm working on now a little bit later in my presentation. But I want to start with The Kitchen is Closed and Other Benefits of Being Old to give you a sense of where I locate myself. I'm going to be 87 in 2 weeks. I'm not a woman who is older or elderly or mature. Unlike middle-aged Michelle Obama, I am no longer becoming. I've become. My children are middle-aged and continuing to grow in their fullness. I, on the other hand, appear to have reached what's the maximum level of my maturity. And while I'm more adult in public than I am in private, this has always been the case. I'm less evaluative about how and why people behave as they do, because I've learned over and over again how tremendously complicated it is to be a human being. I delight in the freedom that oldness confers, at least the freedom not to care about so many of the things that once seemed so important. I'm contentedly set in most of my hard-won ways. I've become fond of them since it took me so many decades to figure out what they were. They're what remain after years of painful, grudging, and fearful release of self-protective behaviors and choices, all of which involve psychotherapy, foolish relationships, and way too many gin and tonics. My ways make sense to me. And perhaps if Frank Sinatra hadn't gotten there first, I might have titled this book My Way. The life I thought I was preparing for never arrived. Instead, another unfolded with unexpected openings, gifts, and catastrophes. Nothing I anticipated came to pass, but so much else did. So much I could never have imagined, rich, startling, melancholy, and triumphant. So The Kitchen is Closed is a series of short essays about moving into my 80s and taking and honoring and trying to unpack what it meant then in my younger 80s to be an old woman. So that's what that book is about. Leaving home at 83 is the story of a mistake. And it's a mistake from which I learned so much about myself that even after all these decades, I had never noticed. The main thing being that I never knew myself as a fearful person. As Rivka said in her introduction, I was divorced young, alone in New York City with 2 little kids, and I had to scramble to make our life. And if there was fear, there was no room for it because I had to take the next step and the next step and the next step, which is what I've always done. That's important to understand because when fear hit me, as it did in this part of my life, it was unfamiliar and unexpected, and I simply didn't know how to handle it. So the background to leaving home at 83 was the following. One of my very oldest friends decided to move to New York to be near her daughter. Another of my very closest and most beloved friends was dying. And I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I was so scared that I was immobilized. All I could think about was, I need to be near my kids. Now, I have been, and I still am, 36 years now, part of a women's group. We meet the first Saturday of the month. We started at 50 wanting to talk about the politics of menopause. Remember menopause? And we had such a good time with our group, and we deepened and deepened the quality and the kinds of conversations we were having, so that when everybody was post-menopause, we decided to continue. And another 25 years later, we still continue. It's the place, it's the crucible where we gather to talk about what it is to be us. But in the naivete of our 70s, and I can only say that from this vantage point, that it was a naive time, we promised we were going to take each other through. We were committed to that and devoted to the idea of taking each other through. Difficulty was we had no understanding of what that meant or was going to entail. And as we moved into our 80s, the love and the commitment was there, but one of the women didn't drive anymore. Another one didn't remember. Another one couldn't hear. Another one's partner was ill. They weren't going to take one another or me anywhere except maybe to a doctor's appointment or a casserole if I had a cold. So it was very clear to all of us that we were not going to accompany one another in the ways we had imagined. It was going to be our family. And for one or two of us who are what is now called, wisely, I think, solo agers, it was about creating the resources that they needed to take them through, because moving through is what the 80s, in my view, is about, what it means to think about moving through this time. I have been a woman all my life who was fiercely autonomous, made my own decisions, was not somebody I would have called needy, which was not a good word in my vocabulary. It was something to be avoided. I would ask for help with my tried and trusted beloveds, as they would ask me. But as a general way that I lived my life, I was autonomous, I was independent, I was self-sufficient. I took enormous pride in being all of those things. And in this particular moment, when it felt like the foundation of my life was shifting in such a abrupt and dramatic way, I didn't want to be autonomous anymore. I wanted to be a big, tall baby. I wanted to be taken care of. And it was such an unfamiliar feeling. And I just simply yielded to it because I was so scared. And the result of that was both of my daughters at that time were coincidentally living in the same city. And I thought, I'll go there. I'll move into an independent living facility near them. I'll have all my meals. There'll be activities. There'll be people. My kids will be nearby. It's perfect. Of course, it was so far from perfect. So far from perfect. But it illuminated for me the tension, which is one of the things that I hope our conversation will begin to unpack, that each of us has a very different relationship to autonomy and dependency. Some of us are happy being taken care of and take care of one another, and it's an easy, fluid kind of way of relating. Others of us are stubbornly set in their ways, autonomous like me, and being taken care of feels like a kind of vulnerability that's uncomfortable. We all start somewhere. And of course, that all goes back to our beginnings and how we were taken care of and what it means to have been taken care of and so forth. But knowing ourselves that clearly is really important as we think about, when we move into our 80s, what kinds of decisions make the most sense for us. That's abstract. So let me give you a little bit of sense from leaving home of what the experience was for me. I had not seen this place. I didn't want to see the place. I just wanted to be near my kids. And I closed up my life of 50 years, got on a plane and came to what I'm calling here Desert Manor. Taking the elevator to the third floor, we walked down the brown linoleum hallway designed to look like wood. It didn't. My apartment was in the Jewish Quarter, so named, I later learned, because of Shana, a resident whose Jewish-themed paintings covered both sides of the mushroom-covered walls. Beside each front door was a shelf designed to provide the residents with an opportunity to express their individuality, make a statement about who they were, or a changing announcement of the holidays they celebrated. We passed artwork that signaled, "Here lives lovers of Brooklyn, Christ, Israel, and grandchildren." Arriving at my apartment, I found it was, as the videos had indicated, spacious. The living room opening onto a large balcony I was to share with an extended family of pigeons. What the videos had carefully left out was the fact that the pigeons used it as an outhouse. There was pigeon shit everywhere, and undoubtedly lots more to come. All the shit and the dominant view of the rooftops of neighboring houses put an end to my fantasies of watching the sun rise and set, having morning coffee, and reading in the late afternoon. The pigeons had already claimed the territory. So as I tried to make my way into the world of Does It Matter, my very first experience of institutional living, I'll read you the sections about me trying to find my way into the Jewish community in Desert Manor, give you a little bit of a sense of that. I was curious about the Shabbat services Benny and Malka led. While I was surprised they were held on Friday at 11 a.m., I told myself I could be theologically flexible. 1 month of Fridays later, I was ready to join whatever this would be and made my way to the cinema room, a dark, windowless space with rows of bulky, leather-covered, oversized chairs facing a massive blank screen. The walls were covered in movie posters that spanned the history of the medium. Rudolph Valentino looking lascivious, Rita Hayworth being tempestuous, Cary Grant as always debonair, and John Wayne permanently manly. Malka stood by the door greeting each attendee and handing them a Xeroxed prayer book. She welcomed me. I sat down next to Rosalind and near Benny, who was already in his seat next to the blank movie screen with a computer on his lap. She walked over to a pair of electric candles on the ledge beneath the screen and coughed, which appeared to be the signal to quiet down. The rules handbook I had been given the day I arrived made it clear that no fire of any kind was allowed at Desert Manor. No Shabbat candles in our apartments, no menorahs, no nothing. The combination of our oldness, their insurance premiums, and the ever-present possibility of a conflagration unwittingly begun by an inattentive resident required strict adherence to the need for alternative illumination. Malka turned the electric bulbs on and led us in the blessing that began the service. Then Benny, at his wife's direction, which consisted of a brief eye command, they'd been married for 51 years, pressed a button on his computer. An all-male Israeli chorus filled the screen, enthusiastically singing Lecha Dodi and inviting us to welcome the Sabbath. Several residents sang along, a man sitting in the back row wearing a yarmulke, the most animated of our elderly flock. We then moved on to the central prayer of the Shema as he continued his vigorous participation. When the service moved to the prayer offering comfort and healing to the sick, Malka invited us to call out the names of those who needed healing. Nearly everyone had someone they wanted to include. Benny clicked again and Debbie Friedman filled the screen singing Mishaberach, the blessing for healing. Later, when Kaddish, the prayer to honor the dead, was read, she again asked us to identify the names of those who had died. I understood then that providing the opportunity for residents to gather and call up the names of their sick and their dead was the central and comforting objective of the Shabbat morning service. After Odon Olam, the traditional triumphant closing hymn sung by another Israeli group on the big screen, Rosalind passed around challah wine and grape juice as Malka led us in the blessings that accompanied each one. All of this was managed in an hour or so that everybody could get to the dining room. So this was my experience of what Jewish life was like when I came into Desert Manor. What changed was the second gathering beside the service was something called Jews Schmooze. And that was also a weekly meeting. And at one of those early meetings, Malka asked people to raise their hand how many were Reform and how many were conservative, which people did. And then I raised my hand and said I was Renewal, which nobody had even heard of. And so Malka asked me to talk the following week at Jew Schmooze about what a Renewal Jew was and what that meant, which I did. And I found myself teaching women and a few men, the men being more conservative actually than the women, and more comfortable with the traditional ways of Jewish life. But they were very curious about what it meant to renew Judaism. And I became, over the period of the next month or so, seen as a teacher and somebody to ask questions about being Jewish and how people were Jewish now. And so I found my way into Jewish life at Desert Manor in that role, which was both gratifying and lonely, because there were no peers, there were no Jewish peers. My Jewish life has been a very radical, alternative, creative, political part of who I am. And in fact, I almost named this book Old Jewish and Queer, but I was told by all the marketing people that would just be a catastrophe. I'm still not sure I made the right decision, but those are my three deepest identities. And so I spent a good part of the 9 months I was at Desert Manor as the go-to person. I led services, I led discussions, and I was seen as an appreciated other. But I was so lonely and I felt so ashamed in front of my kids that I had made this decision and landed in the middle of their lives in the way that I had, about which they were both very generous and very loving. Nevertheless, I was very careful not to say, not to show how eager I was to see them when they took me out to lunch, and to pretend that all was well, because I couldn't imagine anything else. So that takes me to a piece that I want to put in here that is about my life now, but it comes out of where I began to lie to my kids while I was at Desert Manor and continue to lie to my kids. So this is a piece from, it's either going to be called Now What? Notes from the Front Lines of Old Age, or Coming of Age, and it's called Confessions of a Lying Mother. And just a little bit of background about this piece. After 9 months, my younger daughter suggested that for her work, she's a death doula, that Tucson would be a very much better environment for her work, and that I would probably find it politically and culturally and aesthetically more appealing than Phoenix. And she said very carefully, Mom, we could just drive down to Tucson and you could see what you think. And I thought, I already know what I think. Let's go. But I didn't say that. We drove down, and yes, I fell in love with Tucson. I've been here for 3 years. And I live alone in an apartment with all the hard-won wisdom that I learned in the 9 months that I was at Desert Manor. But I want to just give you a little sense of another part of our lives as old women, maybe men. I don't know enough about whether men do this or not, but I know women do. I live alone, and living alone requires some degree of lying. There's no way around it. It isn't that I mean to lie, it's that I want to avoid the conversations that will immediately ensue if I don't. The people who monitor my life, as in my daughters, Need to feel reassured that I'm eating healthily, exercising and sleeping enough, and being engaged. Engaging means different things to them than to my aging friends, but they are the ones to whom I must answer. I call what I do many things, leaving things out, looking at the positive side. But my kids are nobody's fool and don't miss very much. If one does, the other straightens her out. They're in cahoots about their mother, and I have practically no hiding places left. I'm becoming nearly as much of an open book to my kids as I am to my women friends, and left to reconsider where my sense of privacy even is these days. I assure my daughters I eat vast quantities of fruits, vegetables, salmon, and chicken. There is rarely any mention of my consumption of popcorn, rum raisin ice cream, or pistachio nuts. When we're having a meal together, I'm careful to order a big slab of protein surrounded by leafy green leaves. I demur when offered crackers and cheese and murmur daintily with a downcast expression, dairy. Until they read this, I'll continue to feel confident I've gotten away with those lies. There's more things that I lie to my daughters, not exactly lying. I just never mention them, like losing, followed by forgetting, and I have begun to talk out loud. I'm a very tidy woman. Everything in my home has a spot in which it resides, a clear and obvious one, so that it's easy to find when I go to retrieve it. Order comforts me. But even in my carefully put together home, I lose things. Eventually, they turn up in a pants pocket, lost at the bottom of my bag, or stuck between a pile of papers in my desk. But how that came to be their momentary resting place is never clear. At the sad conclusion of my early marriage, I lost my house keys twice in 1 week. Sometimes there's meaning in losing, not anymore. There are no metaphors to explore here. Talking out loud, a new development in my living alone, feels comforting. It isn't that I want another person's voice in my apartment. I just want a voice, and mine is just fine. I think I'll watch Hacks, I say brightly. Then I get up from my desk, walk into the living room, and do just that. It's a little like having non-demanding company. I enjoy talking to myself and continue to find myself sprightly. I lose words. Of course I do. I'm old. I even lose entire trains of thought. But I remember enough to keep myself interested and do my best to decide that whatever I forgot wasn't essential, or that the thought will eventually return. But when it does, it's often in the middle of something else where it doesn't fit, and I don't understand why I'm remembering whatever it is. This kind of thing is happening more and more often. Then I have to navigate my embarrassment with a lie, followed by my annoyance at my embarrassment. My kids detect every instance of my forgetting, and even worse, the moments when I go entirely blank. That's pretty recent. Behind my agreeable face is an old woman holding fiercely to her wavering autonomy. My lying is buying me the time I want as my own. And I'll continue to lie as long as I can get away with it. But that time will come. And then I will have to face my greatest fear about aging, not being a burden on my children's life. At the very end of leaving home at 83, I write, I sit on a much smaller balcony now, one with no pigeons and a glorious view of the mountains and the astonishing sunrises. I am an 86-year-old Jewish lesbian feminist, one who reads and writes, who prays and asks questions, and one who tries to make the world I'm in just a little bit better. After these long months of wandering, I have found my new home. So that's a little bit of a very quick overview of what my life has been the last couple of years. I think the thing that I want to add before we open for the questions, which is my favorite part of these conversations, is that when I landed in Tucson, I discovered an organization called Senior Pride. And Senior Pride is probably the best equivalent to a village here in Tucson, and it became like a cushion upon which I could, bruised emotionally as I was, come to rest. And it's a community of old LGBT folks in Tucson, a wide range of people, as I imagine there is in Shtetl, except that there is, in your case, a Jewish shorthand, in my case here with Senior Pride, a shorthand about what it has been to be gay and lesbian throughout most of our lives, and finding community that is embedded in that understanding. My Jewish life here in Tucson is spent on Zoom. My congregation is in Berkeley, Chachmat Halev. It's been my congregation for decades. And that's how I live my Jewish life now, is through Zoom. So I guess that's enough about me. And I hope that some of what I've said elicits for you some new questions or previously unasked thoughts about, for those of you in your 70s, how are you thinking about the 80s? And how do you want to shape, I don't mean the medical paperwork and all that, although that's complicated enough, but how you want to inhabit it as fully yourself, and what would need to surround you in order for that to be the case. That's what I'm hoping we can talk about, but I am, of course, open to whatever questions you have. That's me.
Okay, great. So Toby's going to lead us in a little nigun or musical something while we write any questions we have for Sandy on the cards that we handed out. Those that are on Zoom can put their questions in the chat, and Sherry will convert those questions onto cards and they'll be incorporated. Amy, would you be willing to sort the cards into meaningful groups? Great. And maybe Ellen, you could work with Amy.
This is happening. Let me just flesh out a little bit more that there were lots of people at Desert Manor who are having an absolutely marvelous experience. There's one woman in particular with purple hair who said it's like being at camp every day. It was just the perfect way for her to be an old woman. And there were several couples that were finding the experience very successful because they had a partner who needed assisted living, and they had all the benefits of independent living while having some of the partner's care managed by staff, so that it wasn't all on them as it had been before they moved in. So there are many reasons that independent living or three-tier communities can work for us. This was my particular experience, but what I hope you heard from my experience was it led me to, as all good Jewish women understand, is everything leads to a question. There are maybe answers, maybe not, but there's always questions. And so I came away with questions about who does this serve? How does it serve them? For what kind of old people is this a fit? What are the alternatives to institutional living for old people for whom it's not a fit, and so forth? So just a little bit of fleshing that out.
Thank you. We're going to take just a few minutes with the music and writing, and then we'll collect the cards and sort them. As that's happening, I'll ask a few opening questions and then we can go from there. You and I had an email exchange about what happens when people no longer share your earliest memories or memories at all. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience with that and connection between memory and meaning and identity and how you negotiate that.
So you're starting small. Okay, let me try. I've had 2 coffees. I could probably do this. What comes to my mind is standing next to my mother as her sister's body was being lowered into the ground. And she turned to me and said, "Now there's no one left who knew me as a girl." And I found that so moving and so touching. But of course, I had no understanding, no lived experience of what it is to be in a life where there is no one left who knew me as a girl. I'm left to retrieve and cradle those memories myself and share them with close people. But there's that kind of knowing is gone. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is, I think that the deepest longing that we all have is to be known, to have our lives witnessed, to feel seen in our lives. And that was very much a part of the 50 years I lived in the Bay Area. These women accompanied my every success and failure, the ups and downs of my kids making their way into adulthood, the deaths of my parents and my brothers, my illnesses, my fears, my insecurities, my hip replacements, everything. It was the kind of thing where I would, for example, say my brother's name and everyone knew the whole story of my brother and me and my brother. I no longer have that. Of course, if I had stayed in the Bay Area, there would have come a time where I wouldn't have had that either, because the women in my life are starting to die. But what I have here now in Tucson is something different. I don't use the same words to describe it. These women are companions in the old chapter of my life. They're community members, they're friends, but we don't know one another deeply. That part of my life is now over. I do go to the Bay Area a couple of times a year and visit and have the richness of what's remaining of the world I was in for 50 years. But in my daily life now, there's a sweetness about everybody kind of knowing without saying that what we're creating is something different than what came before. It's age appropriate, it's energy appropriate, it has a companionable tenderness and its own shorthand. We eat dinner early. If we're going to go to the movies, it tends to be more in the afternoon than the evening. If we're going to go to a gallery, it's not on the weekend when it's crowded. Like all those old accommodations are accommodations everybody's making. The way I hold memory is with words and with storytelling and with inviting memories of women. I'm teaching memoir in 2 retirement communities now, and there's something about writing the stories, taking your life seriously, finding the words that pin what it's been to be you on the page. You don't even have to be a good writer. You just have to want your life to be on the page for the great-grandchildren who will read it. I guess to say it Jewishly, it depends. Nobody knows me as a little girl anymore. All that remains of my life as a little girl is what I've written about it. There are 5 or 6 women, old women in the Bay Area who know me down to the bone. And there are 15 or 20 women and 1 or 2 men here in Tucson who will be my companions going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have 6 or 7 more questions that came from the crowdsourcing, as they say. So how did you convince or perhaps get your daughters on board with your decision to leave Desert Manor and return to living on your own?
I didn't have to work very hard to get them on board. I saw in the chat there was another related question, so let me try to answer them both. The question in the chat was something about what was I embarrassed about in front of my kids. When I went to Phoenix, my younger daughter, the one with whom I moved to Tucson, came to the Bay Area and took me through the surgery and the first 5 weeks or so of my recovery, but they took a hunk out of my lung. And it was the scary part for me then was, am I having a bad day, or is this ordinary breathlessness, or should I sit down, or should I try to push through? And it was just exquisitely vulnerable. And after 5 weeks, she needed to return to her life. And when the door closed behind her, and I turned back into my apartment, I thought, I can't do this by myself. It's too scary. I didn't, as I said before, do research. I didn't, and here's the embarrassed part, I didn't say to my girls, I think I'd like to move to be near you. What do you think about that? They were taking their father through to the end of his life. He was in a senior facility and they were both alternating his care. He was at that point 96. He lived till 99. And they were in the middle of their own busy lives, plus their dad. What would have been appropriate and respectful on my part was to, at the very least, have some long, careful conversations about what I was thinking and what they thought about it and what kind of timing would work for them. And I didn't do that. I just said, I want to come to Phoenix. And they said, okay. And they deserved better from me in that process. And as I said at the beginning, because I was so unfamiliar with myself as a scared person, I just kept barreling forward to where I thought I would feel secure, which was near them. They were as perfect as they could be. They folded me in, they took me to lunch, they made quiches and dropped them off because the food was just so terrible. And I'm grateful for their kindness and their generosity to me in my flounderings. I think part of it, I would just say on my kids' behalf, is that they have each floundered in their lives more than once. And floundering is something that we do, and we fold in on one another when one of us is floundering. And this was my very biggest of flounders.
Okay, thank you. You actually anticipated the next question, so I'll zip right along here. Will you be able to stay where you are when you need more help? And if not, do you have a plan for that time?
Yeah, I do. So there's a little bit of a backstory here. When my partner, Barbara Rosenblum, died at 44 in 1988, we were living in San Francisco. It was the time of AIDS. It was a time of death in the gay and lesbian community. That's what it was. It was a time of death and people thinking about dying, planning to die. There was an underground of ways people could help one another die that was very widespread. And the idea that came out of the gay male community at that time of choosing the time of your own death, knowing what not doing that was like, witnessing it over and over again. That was something that Barbara decided she wanted for herself as well. I didn't include that in Cancer in Two Voices because I felt that it would have at that time been a cause celeb for a subject matter that was not the reason that Barbara and I wrote the book. We wrote it together, alternating chapters, her writing about facing her death and me writing about preparing to lose her. But that's been in my mind, that experience of people deciding when it was time for their life to come to an end. So for me, I have an ethical will, I have a living will, and I have a legal will, because as my kids tell me, I'm wordy. When I am no longer able to think and talk and read and speak, that will be when my life comes to an end. If my body begins to decline and my mental capacities are fine, I'll make those accommodations in whatever way I need to. But watching my ex-husband, my kid's dad, live all the way till 99 with each year being lonelier and physically harder and cognitively more bewildering, it confirmed for me that is not what I want for the end of my life. And at 87 and cognitively just fine, that feels like how I'm going forward. Now, as I learned with my lung cancer, everything can change in a moment. My kids are aware of what I'm saying here. I've discussed it with them. And as I say, my younger daughter is a death doula, so she's fluent in thinking about these kinds of questions and so on. If something happens that makes me reconsider, then I'll reconsider. But as of this Sunday morning, at the end of March 2025, that's how I'm holding it going forward.
Thank you. I think maybe a deep breath and out again. I think that wasn't the answer anyone was expecting. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me say one little thing, Rivka. When I was a young woman and I was being an activist, it was really important to me that I be charming and that people liked me, and that those kinds of 40 and 50-year-old feelings that seemed really important, that I be graceful and charming and likable and so forth. And where I am now is that all I have to offer anybody is the truth about what it's been to be me, and whatever way that's useful, that's good. But for me to mediate the truth about what it's been to be me at almost 87 feels so dishonest and so unnecessary. And so if what I'm saying isn't a fit for you, or it doesn't resonate with your values or what you believe, that's okay. But I do want everyone listening to know that this is the absolute truth of what it is to be me right now.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting anything else. And just to know, we have at least one hospice chaplain in the room, maybe, no, at least two, three, four. I'm sorry, 5 chaplains? Hospice doctor. Hospice doctor, okay. Long-term care rabbi, okay. So I think the questioner was probably thinking, will I have someone come live with me? But you did you. Thank you. And may I ask, just out of curiosity, is medical aid in dying a legal thing now in Arizona?
No, but there's Oregon and you have professionals in your community who know this way better than I do. I guess what my sense of it is that it's a growing consciousness, it's a growing awareness, it's a growing conversation, and it's spreading and it's becoming more and more acceptable. Now, of course, we're in Trump land, so it's very difficult to know what's going to be going forward in terms of people's well-being and what won't. But I think that I feel fairly sanguine that if that's the path that the end of my life takes, I'll be able to find a piece of geography in which it'll work.
Thank you. Okay, to change focus a little bit, have you found intimate friends where you are now? And if so, how and where?
Again, it's one of those, it depends answers. It depends on how you defined intimate. I talk to the people in my life here in Tucson the exact same way that I talk to you right now. There's nothing different about it. And what happens, I find, is that because I speak with the close to the boneness of things that I do, that invites the same kinds of responses from people that I've only known for a few months. So what ends up happening is a deepening that's faster than it might have been otherwise. I never liked or was good at small talk. I like it even less now. And so when I'm with somebody, I enter intimately, like I'm entering with all of you today. And so it's a different quality of intimacy. It's not an intimacy with the full knowing over decades, but it is a kind of intimacy where everything can be said.
Hmm.
To me, that's the most important thing, is that everything can be said, that we can be known and witnessed and accompanied in this chapter, even with people who've only known us for a couple of years. That's still a possibility.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, one or two more. This person says, I am a retired geriatrician. I look forward to being a burden to my kids, and so do they. I think this is about caring and family. Your thoughts? Thank you for your talk.
Okay, I completely agree. And I look forward now to being a burden on my kids. I had COVID last week, and my eldest daughter came down and fluttered around and cooked for me and helped me in the shower and did all that stuff. And I could see what a good time she was having, and I could see how happy she was taking care of me. And as she left, about 3 days later, she said, Mom, this is the first time you really ever let me cook for you and take care of you, which was true. And I thought, she's happy, I'm happy, this is going to work. It's the burden part. I had to release in my mind that it's a burden. So let me say it a different way. When I was in my late 50s, early 60s, and my mother was my age, I called her every Sunday to make sure she was okay. And was she eating well? And was she walking around the reservoir? And how was her driving? And did Alma bring her chicken? And so forth. And as soon as I got all my questions answered and I knew my mother was okay, it was like a check I could make in my mind of, for this week, Mama's okay, because I was in the middle of my own life and I was besotted with my own life. And one of the parts of my life was being a responsible daughter. when I finally had to bring her to be with me, because I guess this is an important piece to say, because my mother and I did not have the quality of intimacy and truth-telling that my daughters and I have, it felt like a loving responsibility. I think what my kids feel and what I'm going to feel when the time comes is it's going to be some funny kind of a gift for everybody, but we don't exactly know what kind of a gift it's going to be. But after my experience at Desert Manor, I will happily lean right into it, and did with the COVID. I leaned right into it. And it felt wonderful to be just lying there and saying, I need another slice of lemon from my water, and off my kid would scurry to get me another slice of lemon. This has not been any part of my life until recently. This is not what my life has been. And it's delicious and I love it. And that will be what it is going forward. And the word burden can be thrown off the cliff. It's not a burden anymore. But I had to come to understand that it's not a burden, that it's a gift. That's not an idea. I had to live my way through all the way to that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to say that there's one more question I was handed that I think is really for people who have expertise in medical aid and dying. And I am going to work with the program committee to create a program for us about end of life subjects more closely. I am going to ask one more question that's self-interested for Shtetl. We are hoping that out of this comes the possibility of what we call chevra groups, fellowships groups or friendships groups. Other villages call them neighborly groups. Small groups of, I don't know, 8 to 12 people who meet perhaps monthly, perhaps twice a month, as friends, as mutual supports with one another. And they make up the rules, except do no harm. We don't make up the rules. And I'm going to pass around a sheet to see if there are people here who are interested in that kind of group within Shtetl. But I'm wondering what advice you might have or any thoughts you might have for
Sure. Yeah, that's would be the most perfect outcome from my point of view for any of the talks that I give. So I'll tell you a story. I came out of first the old left, for those of you who remember that, then I went into the new left. And in the new left, during the early Vietnam resistance period, there was an understanding that there was something called a woman question. And the woman question was something that was going to be resolved after the workers took back the means of production or something like that. But I kept hearing about the women question, and I was curious enough finally to go to something brand new that had just started in San Francisco called consciousness raising, see what it was, and to see if I valued it as a new left person. And the first thing that happened for me, as a pretty seasoned, decade-long seasoned political woman, I wasn't a woman, I was a chick, was that I realized I had never sat in a circle. I had never sat in a way where everybody saw everybody. Then the facilitator said something we've all heard a million times since, but I had never heard it then, which was, let's go around and say why it is you came here and what it is that you hope happens, or something like that. I had never heard of a political meeting doing stuff like that. Nobody ever asked me why I came to a political meeting. And I stopped listening, this is who I was then, to the answers so I could begin to rehearse my own answer so that it would be warm and charming and truthful enough so that maybe somebody would ask me for coffee afterwards. That was my goal. And when it was my turn and I started to talk, To my absolute horror, I began to weep. I had never in my life at 30, whatever I was, wept in front of strangers, not been in control of how I presented myself and how I wanted to be seen. And I sputtered and apologized. And the facilitator said, "That's okay, Sandy, you're grieving." And I thought, you can say those words to strangers who haven't been tested for safety yet. You can feel things in front of people you don't know, and it's okay. It was an absolutely life-changing moment. I can still see it and feel it as clearly as when it happened. And then the experience of what we came to call ourselves the Wandering Minstrels, now year 36, the slow, careful deepening that happens in a circle, the things that some women are comfortable talking about, but it takes maybe 6 or 8 months to get to some of the other subjects that are harder or more raw or vulnerable for them. It takes patience. It takes an absence of certainty, because everybody makes their way in the ways that they make their way at the tempo that they make it. It's about the phrase that I used at the beginning of my talk with you about remembering how complicated and hard it is to be a human being, and that we're all mincing our way towards the best and the most open and the most honest we can be, with all of the things that keep us from that. So if I were to say any advice, it would be to remember how each participant has their own tempo, has their own relationship to language, that there is never challenging, there is never feedback, there is never any of that. It is all about receiving, because part of what happens in these circles when they work well is that the person who's talking is hearing themselves, often for the first time, saying those words out loud and moving closer and closer to herself because she's saying those words out loud. So it's a witness, it's a receiving, it's not knowing anything about where the group is going to go or what the subjects ought to be or any of that. And in fact, if you're going to start a group, it could be with something like, let's spend the first meeting talking about how you feel about the word old applied to you. Just start there and start to move out from there to the parts of being old that you're grateful for, that you're resistant to, whatever it all is, and let the tempo of each of the participants and the collective tempo of the group find itself, so that there's no leader, there's no director, there's no expectations about what ought to be covered or any of that. It has to have real delicacy.
Wow. You've got a number of thumbs up in the room. Thank you so much, Sandy. This has been just extraordinary, fabulous. You can't hear all the comments, but it's just really been special. And maybe you can hear an applause.
I can't, but I tell you what, if you want to give people my website and people want to write to me things maybe they weren't ready to say, or things that they want to ask me, I'm happy to respond.
Okay, that's sandrabutler.net.
SandraButler.net. Yeah, absolutely free to contact me.
Okay.
It was funny. I was at the Tesla demonstration yesterday. I've been going every Saturday except for the COVID. And some of you may know this. There's this wonderful thing that you can get, not at Amazon, a cane that opens to a seat. And so you can demonstrate and resist while seated, which is a very good old thing to be able to do. And I say that to say, I spend a good deal of my life, except when I'm getting my steps, which I dutifully do every day, I spend a lot of my life seated at the computer or in front of a wonderful book. So don't hesitate to write to me. I'm happy to be seated on my computer and be in conversation with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And other folks that are online, please stay online because we want to talk about where to go from here. And Sandy, we'll let you go and get a little respite.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you so much.
everybody.
Okay, wonderful. Much applause there. Okay, wow. Oh, she got us. How about everybody stand up for just a moment, shake it all out, and we can talk about where we're going. All righty. So if you'll take your seat again, I have an important question. What's the most important thing you took away from this presentation by Sandy? One sentence, please, because there was a lot. So yes, please. Okay, sense of intimacy. I'm going to repeat it so that the people on Zoom can hear it. Anyone else? We're not static. We change and need to accept those changes. To be self-aware, to be vulnerable, and reach out in your vulnerability. Moving to a senior center retirement community is not necessarily the next step. The shift from being a burden to receiving loving care.
To live your truth.
Episodal care is one thing, long-term care is quite another. An intimacy where everything can be said. What happens if you don't have children to take care of you? And as we learned in the Dorot program that we offered a year and a half ago, what if you have children, but they're not the right children? So I want to say something about this. All leads very naturally into the notion of Shtetl and where we're going and what we're trying to create here, and the ability to be able to support each other, not just driving and changing light bulbs and walking dogs or feeding cats, but also the kind of interpersonal support that we can offer each other as peers or almost peers as we are. I want to suggest that there are a number of ways that you can, let me back up and say, all villages are volunteer, right? It's neighbors helping neighbors. And whereas we hope to have some administrative staff to take the burden off of our board shortly, like September, nonetheless, the energy, the creativity comes from the members. And we have incredible people in this room. I know some of your backgrounds and what you've done in life and the skills you have and the experiences you've had to bring to this endeavor. This gives me extraordinary hope and has all along for what Shtetl 2.0 can become. Ours is the generation that created major change here in Mount Airy. We created the Mount Airy Learning Tree. We created the Weaver's Way Co-op. One thing after another, we just created when we needed it. I want to talk a little bit about how each person in this room can increase your engagement with Shtetl 2.0 to be part of that process and to have a say in what Shtetl becomes. So the first is joining as a founding member, as you may have heard, for this first year at the least. Instead of setting a set fee for membership, we're asking people to make donations, a meaningful donation within your means. So we've had donations from $36 to $6,000. Not expecting a lot of the $6,000, but if you can do it, wouldn't turn it down. Thank you very much. Okay. The second is, along with that, is joining the board or one of our program or service teams. We decided instead of calling them committees, we would call them teams because nobody wants to join a committee, but team is another thing. And or join and start an interest group. So we already have one interest group, and that's the photography interest group, which you're welcome to join. We also have the article discussion group once a month, which right now is looking at defending democracy, a set of articles actually. And I was thinking this would be the perfect time to start a gardening interest group if there are gardeners in our midst. And there may be other interests that you share with others and want to start an ongoing interest group to connect with others around. And finally, as I mentioned to Sandy, we want to see if we can start the Hever group process. So I want to pass around 2 sets of sign-up sheets. There's room for 2 people on each page and multiple pages. So if you put your name, email, and phone at the top and check off the things that you might be interested in taking part in, and those that are still on the Zoom can also send something in the chat about things that interest you, and in particular, whether you're interested in joining a Hever group. And we will look at these and see what we can pull together. This is all experimental. We've never done this before, but look what we've done in just 6 months. We will be following up this, hopefully this week, both with a link to the recording so you can listen again and other information. So thank you. All right, David, do you want to take us out?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Rosenberg. I'm a board member of Shtetl 2.0, and I just want to thank everyone for being here. And what a great program it looks like. I hope you can enjoy the rest of your day. I think the sun's trying to come out. I wanted to do a few acknowledgements. So first, certainly we want to thank Germantown Jewish Center for endorsing Shtetl 2.0 and graciously hosting this meeting, as well as all the staff who helped to put everything together. We also want to thank our 88 founding members whose confidence in us and generous donations keep our emerging project going. Raise your hand if you're a Shtetl member. Wow, look at that. If you're not, I hope you heard Rivka's pitch and that you can join us as well. I want to thank our board members, many of whom are here. We meet every month to work to create the programs and services you guys are getting. If you're on the board, please raise your hand. And if you're not on the board, feel free to ask one of us a question. And then I also want to thank Sherry and Rivka, who helped plan today's program, and everyone who helped participate, including everyone who helped pitch in with the food and organizing everything. You're all big help, and that's Shtetl's meaning, is everyone helping each other and supporting each other. And finally, just want to thank everyone in this room and on Zoom who took the time out for your Sunday to join us and to hear this really engaging program. So with that, I guess let's give one more round of applause. And then to close out, this is something that we like to do with our Shtetl programs. If you could give us one word that kind of sums up your feeling about today, your thoughts, any kind of one word reflection. Anyone here want to share one word?
Inspiring.
Inspiring. Appreciate. More inspiring. I love it. Double inspiring. Exciting. Gratitude. Very nice. 3, inspiring. Thankful. Awesome. Great food. Okay, that's important. Thank you to Reaver's Way. So thank you again, and please stay tuned for more really exciting interactive Shtetl programs. Thank you.